Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you just wanted to pack up and run away from all of your problems? Maybe you've even done it before. Today, we're going to dive into why that might be the biggest mistake you're making. Many of us are inclined to avoid or run away from our problems. We think that if we just ignore them, they'll magically disappear. Running away often makes things worse and causes the same issue to repeat over and over and over again. It's like being stuck in a never-ending loop of the same old problems. But what if I told you there is a way to break this cycle? What if facing your problems head on could be the key to transforming your life? That's exactly what we're going to explore today. Facing my problem sounds hard. It sounds like suffering. And you're right, it is hard. It does involve suffering. Suffering is often the pathway to growth. When you work out, your muscles suffer, but they grow stronger. When you study for an exam, your brain suffers, but you become more knowledgeable. The same principle applies to life's challenges. In 1 Peter 5 verse 10, it says, "But may the God of all grace, who called us to his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after you have suffered a while, perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle." Let that sink in for a moment. This verse is telling us something profound about the power of growth and transformation. It's saying that after we've suffered for a little while, God will perfect us, establish us, strengthen us, and settle us. But here's the catch. Notice the order. The growth, the strength, the peace, they all come after the suffering. It's not saying God will make everything easy and then we'll grow. No, it's saying that through the challenges, through the suffering, we'll experience true transformation. This verse is a promise, but it's also a challenge. God is saying, I've got you. My grace is sufficient. But you've got to go through it to grow through it. So, the next time you're facing a problem and you're tempted to run, remember this verse. Remember that the suffering you're experiencing might just be the pathway to your growth and strength. Let's dig deeper into why it's so crucial not to run away from our problems. You see, problems aren't just obstacles to be avoided. They're opportunities for growth. Every challenge you face is a chance to learn something new about yourself or to develop new skill, to become more resilient. Every time you face a problem and overcome it, you're essentially leveling up the game of life. You're becoming stronger, wiser, more capable of handling whatever life throws at you next. But here's what happens when we run away from our problems. Phew, we think, I dodged that bullet. The problem doesn't just disappear. It's still there, waiting for us. And often it grows bigger while we're not looking. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you're struggling with your finances. You've got bills piling up and you're barely making ends meet. It's stressful. It's uncomfortable. You're tempted to just ignore it all. Maybe you throw those bills in a drawer without opening them. Maybe you avoid checking your bank balance. That's running away from the problem. But those bills are still there. That debt is still growing. And the longer you avoid it, the worse it gets. Imagine instead that you face this problem head on. It's going to be uncomfortable. It might involve some suffering. You might have to cut back on expenses, take on extra work, or have some difficult conversations with creditors. But by facing it, you're taking control. You're learning valuable lessons about budgeting, about financial management. You're developing discipline and resilience. And here's the beautiful part. Once you face this problem and overcome it, you're better equipped to handle financial challenges in the future. You've grown through the suffering. This principle applies to all areas of life. Relationship problems, facing them head on might be painful, but it leads to better communication skills and stronger relationships. Career challenges, tackling them might be stressful, but it leads to professional growth and new opportunities. Every problem you face is an opportunity to become a better version of yourself. Now, let's look at how this idea of facing challenges plays out in the Bible. Throughout Scripture, we see that God often uses suffering and challenges as tools for transformation. Think about Joseph in the Old Testament. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. That's a lot of suffering. But through each of those challenges, Joseph grew in character and wisdom. And ultimately, all of these trials prepared him for his purpose, to save his family and the entire nation of Egypt from famine. Or consider Moses. He had to confront Pharaoh, lead a difficult journey through the desert, and deal with constant complaints from Israelites. It wasn't easy, but through these challenges, Moses developed into one of the greatest leaders in biblical history. And let's not forget David. Before he became king, he faced a giant named Goliath, and was hunted by Saul and lived as a fugitive. Each of these challenges shaped David's character and prepared him for leadership. In each of those stories, we see that God allowed these challenges not as a punishment, but as opportunities for growth and preparation. The suffering these biblical figures endured was the very thing that equipped them for their purpose. This brings us to an important point: God's purpose in allowing challenges in our lives. When we face difficulties, it's easy to think, why is God letting this happen to me? But what if we shifted our perspective? What if instead we asked, what is God trying to show me through this? You see, challenges often reveal weaknesses in our character or areas in our lives that need growth. Maybe a financial crisis reveals a need for better stewardship. Perhaps a relationship conflict exposes a need for better communication skills or more patience. A career setback might be a highlight for areas where we need to develop our new skills or attitudes. By facing these challenges head on, we allow God to work in us, refining us like gold in the fire. It's not always comfortable. In fact, it rarely is. But it's through this process that true transformation happens. So the next time you're facing a challenge and you're tempted to run, remember these biblical examples. Remember that the suffering you're experiencing might just be the tool God is using to shape you for your purpose. Let's dive deeper into the role of confrontation in the Christian life. In Romans 5, verse 3-5, Paul writes, "We also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope." Now let's break this down. Paul is saying that we should actually glory or rejoice in our tribulations. Why? Because tribulations produce perseverance, which produces character, which produces hope. It's like a spiritual workout routine. Just as physical exercise builds muscle, facing challenges builds spiritual strength. But here's the key. This growth only happens when we face our challenges head on. If we run from our tribulations, we miss out on the opportunity to develop perseverance, character, and hope. Let's look at the example of Job. Talk about someone who faced immense suffering, his health, even his children. Instead, he faced his suffering head on, maintaining his faith even when he didn't understand why he was suffering. And what was his result? Job's faith was deepened, his character was strengthened, and in the end, God restored everything that he had lost, and then some. But here's the important part. If Job had run from his suffering, if he had abandoned his faith, he would have missed out on the growth and restoration that would have come through his trials. This brings us to a crucial point. Confronting our problems is how we break free from unhealthy cycles. When we run from our problems, we often find ourselves facing the same issues over and over again. But when we confront them, we have the opportunity to learn, grow, and break free from these cycles. For example, let's say you struggle with anger. Every time you get angry, you might get tempted to just suppress it or avoid the situation that triggered it. But that doesn't solve the problem. It just pushes it down until it explodes again later. However, if you confront your anger issues head on, maybe through prayer, counseling, or intentional work on managing your emotions, you have the opportunity to actually overcome this struggle. True transformation doesn't come from avoiding your issues. It comes from facing them, learning from them, and allowing God to work through them to change us. Let's look at the ultimate example of facing suffering, Jesus Christ himself. Jesus knew exactly what was coming. He knew about the betrayal, the torture, the crucifixion. He even prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, asking if there was any other way. But ultimately, he chose to face his immense suffering head on. Why? Because he understood the purpose behind it. Jesus knew that through his suffering, he would bring about the salvation of humanity. He didn't run from the cross. He embraced it because he knew the incredible good that would come from it. This is a powerful lesson for us. Often, we run from suffering because we can't see any purpose in it. But Jesus shows us that sometimes the greatest blessings comes through the hardest hardships. If Jesus had avoided the cross, where would we be? Lost? Without hope? Without a way to be reconciled with God? Now, I'm not saying that all suffering is good or that we should seek out hardship, but I'm saying that when suffering comes our way, we shouldn't automatically run from it. Instead, we should face it with faith, trusting that God can use even our most difficult experiences for good. Remember Romans 8:28? It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose." All things, including our suffering, including our challenges, including the problems we'd rather run from. So the next time you're facing a difficult situation or tempted to run, remember Jesus. Remember how he faced the ultimate suffering for a greater purpose. And ask yourself, what purpose might God have for in allowing me to face this challenge? How might he want to use this to grow me, to shape me, to prepare me for something greater? How do we actually go about embracing confrontation instead of running away from our problems? Let's break it down into practical steps. Well, first, we need to identify the root cause of our problems. Often, the issues we face are just symptoms of deeper issues. For example, if you're constantly arguing with your spouse, the root cause might not be the specific things you're arguing about, but rather poor communication skills or unresolved past hurts. To identify the root causes, we need to take time for reflection. This might involve journaling, prayer, or even seeking counsel from a trusted friend or a professional. Ask yourself, why do I keep facing this same issue? What patterns can I identify in my behavior or thinking? Once you've identified the root cause, it's time to confront it. And this is where the rubber meets the road, because confronting our deep-seated issues isn't easy. It might involve admitting that we're wrong, changing long-held habits, or facing fears we've been avoiding for years. But here's the good news. We don't have to do this alone. In fact, we can't do it alone. We need God's strength. Remember the verse that we started with? It talked about the God of all grace. The grace is available to us as we face our challenges. So expect God's strength as you confront your problems. This strength might come in unexpected ways, through a friend who encourages you, through a peace that surpasses all understanding, or through a sudden burst of courage when you need it the most. Here's something powerful to remember. When we face our problems with faith, with courage, we're not just growing for ourselves, we're also reflecting God's glory to others. Think about it. When people see you facing your challenges head on instead of running from them, it's a powerful testimony. It shows that your faith is real and that it holds up under pressure. Imagine you're going through a difficult financial period. Instead of hiding it or pretending everything's fine, you are open about your struggles. You make tough decisions. You seek help when you need it. And through it all, you maintain your trust in God. That kind of faith in action can be incredibly inspiring to others who might be facing similar challenges. So, as you confront your problems, remember you're not just doing this for yourself. You're doing this as a witness to God's faithfulness and power in your life. Imagine you have a car with a faulty alarm. Every night it goes off randomly, waking the whole neighborhood up. You could try to ignore it, maybe put some earplugs in, or turn up your TV to drown out the noise. But the problem is still there, annoying your entire neighborhood and potentially draining your battery. The smart thing to do would be to take the car to a mechanic and get the alarm fixed. It might cost you some time and money. You might have to suffer the inconvenience of being without your car for a day, but once it's fixed, the problem is solved for good. This is what it's like when we confront our problems instead of running away from them. It might be uncomfortable in the short term, but it leads to a real and lasting solution. Here's another analogy. Think of your life like a garden. Problems are like weeds. If you ignore them, they don't go away. They grow, they spread, they choke out the good plants in your garden. But if you take the time to pull them out by the roots, yes, it is hard work, but your garden will thrive. One more illustration. Imagine you have a small leak in your roof. You could just put a bucket there and pretend that it's not leaking, but what happens when the big storm comes? The small leak could turn into a major water damage. On the other hand, if you fix the leak when it's small, you prevent a much bigger problem down the road. These illustrations all point to the same truth. Facing our problems early and head on might involve some short-term discomfort or suffering, but it prevents a much bigger issue in the long run. The apostles in the New Testament provide us with powerful examples of facing challenges head on. Let's look at a few of them. First, there was Paul. In Romans 5, he writes about glorifying in tribulations. This is the same Paul who was beaten, imprisoned, shipwrecked, and faced countless other hardships. Yet he saw each challenge as an opportunity for growth and for demonstrating God's power. Then there's Peter. In 1 Peter 4, he encourages believers to rejoice when they participate in sufferings of Christ. Peter, who once denied Jesus out of fear, learned through his own failures and challenges to face difficulties with courage and joy. James, in the first chapter of his epistle, tells us to count it all joy when we face trials. He understood that trials test our faith, producing perseverance and maturity. And of course, there's Jesus himself, who told his disciples to be of good cheer, even in the face of tribulation. What can we learn from these examples? Facing challenges is a normal part of the Christian life. These great heroes of faith didn't have easy lives. They faced immense difficulties, but they faced them with courage and faith and even joy. Second, we see that our attitudes in facing challenges matters. The apostles didn't just grit their teeth and endure suffering. They found reasons to rejoice in it. They understood that God was at work even in their difficulties. And finally, we see that facing challenges with faith can be a powerful testimony. The courage of the apostles in the face of persecution was one of the factors that led to the rapid spread of Christianity in the first century. So the next time you're tempted to run from a problem, remember Paul, Peter, James, and Jesus. Remember their courage, their joy in the face of trials, and the powerful impact their faith had on the world. How can we apply these principles in our daily lives? First, we need to learn to see God's purpose in our challenges. When you face a problem, instead of immediately trying to escape it, pause and ask, God, what do you want to teach me through this? How can I grow from this situation? It can be helpful to keep a journal where you record your challenges and what you're learning from them. Over time, you might start to see patterns, areas where God is consistently working to grow and shape you. Another practical step is to develop what I call a playlist for strength. This is a collection of worship songs, Bible verses, or even inspiring quotes that remind you of God's faithfulness and power. When you're in the midst of a challenge, you're tempted to run. You can turn this playlist on for encouragement and strength. Verses like Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, can be a powerful reminder of the strength we have in God. Remember, your attitude matters more than your circumstances. You can't always control the challenges that come your way, but you can control how you respond to them. Choose to face your challenges with faith, trusting that God has a purpose even in your difficulties. And here's the powerful truth. Often, it's when we stay faithful through the most difficult times that we experience the deepest growth and the greatest blessings. It's like the saying goes, the darkest hour is just before the dawn. So don't give up when things get tough. That might be the moment just before your breakthrough. Facing problems is not just important, it is an essential part of the Christian journey. God uses our challenges to refine us, to build our character, and to prepare us for the purposes He has for us. We've seen how running from our problems often makes them worse, while confronting them leads to growth and transformation. We've looked at examples from the Bible, from Joseph to Moses, to the apostles and Jesus himself. Remember the promise we started with. But may the God of all grace, who called us to himself, to his eternal glory by Jesus Christ, after you have suffered a while, perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. God's not promising to take our problems away, but He is promising to use them to perfect us, to establish us, to strengthen us, and to settle us. So the next time you're facing a challenge and you're tempted to run, remember this: God is with you. His grace is sufficient for you. And through this challenge, He's working to grow you and shape you into the person you are called to be. Now, I want to challenge you to take action based on what we've discussed today. First, I encourage you to pray. Ask God for the strength and courage to face your problems head on. Pray something like this: God, I admit that I've been running from my problems. I've been afraid to face them, but I know that you want to use those challenges to grow me and shape me. Give me the courage to confront my issues. Show me what you want me to learn, and help me to trust in your grace and strength as I face these difficulties. Amen. Second, I want to encourage you to reflect through God's goodness through the challenges. Remember who's watching: your co-workers, your friends, your family. They see how you're responding through difficulty. Your response should be a testimony to God's faithfulness and power in your life. When you face problems with faith and courage, you're not just growing yourself, you're also showing others the reality of God's love and strength. You're demonstrating that faith isn't just for the easy times, but that it holds up under pressure. So go forth with courage, face your challenges head on, trust in God's grace and strength, and watch as He uses your difficulties to transform you and to impact those who are around you. Remember, running from your problems might feel easier in the moment, but facing them with faith is the path to true growth, peace, and purpose. So don't run, confront, don't avoid, engage. Trust that whatever you do, God will be right there with you, using every challenge to shape you into the person He's created you to be.